you strip down this cap and trade bill, what it really means is higher taxes for you and me, more control over your life, what kind of house you're able to have, what kind of car you can drive, how many kids you're allowed to have, how much trash you're able to create before you start getting taxed heavily. Meanwhile, the bigwigs out there are just going to get a bunch of corporate welfare and special programs and give the appearance that they're paying their fair share while never stopping polluting, because this isn't about stopping pollution. This is about doling out, quote unquote, carbon credits to people and really restricting what they're able to do.
Well, it's not really restricting what the corporations are able to do. It's just
I'm talking about the regular people. It's not restricting what the corporations are able to do at all. It's going to restrict, me or you, because they're going to say, well, if you create over 3 bags of garbage, you're going to have to pay a little more. Or if your car only gets 20 miles to the gallon, you're going to have to pay a little more. And if your house, goes over this certain energy limit, you're going to have to pay a little more.
Yes, they're going to put a tax on us, but they're going to allow the polluters to keep polluting at current or levels above what they do now, because what they're going to do is allow them to buy the right to pollute more. And what's interesting about these credits is that the U.S. government essentially, in issuing the credits, or the offsets as they're called, is going to be, it's the same as printing money. So the middleman in the stock market, because it creates a climate credit corporation, and this corporation is really awful, because then it's another money market scheme that's going to be literally unregulated, and so it's another mechanism to move money from, in other words, the poorer segment and the middle class up into this corporate, where the corporations and the middlemen are going to make these huge profits. So, and the thing is that these offsets or credits, one of the things they're doing here in California with our public parks and public forest lands is they're going to they've already measured all of the trees, the circumference, diameter, height, and type, and age, and then they've figured out that the trees are worth so much as offsets or credits, which can be sold on the international stock market to polluters, so they can pollute more.
Explain how that works, because you described that while I was out in California. I mean, how does that work? Each individual tree has a certain amount of, carbon offset credits, and then people who don't even own the land are able to buy this up?
Yeah. In other words, someone could come to me because I have trees on my property, and they could offer me so much money for the credits from the trees that are on my property. And then what they would do is they would pay me just because I have the trees for the credits. And then what they would do is take these credits and offer them on the stock market to people who would buy them in order to be able to offset their pollution. So they're not reducing their pollution, they're just buying the right to pollute. And Governor Schwarzenegger and Speaker Pelosi have already invested in buying tree credits here in California from a middleman, and that was to offset their jet air travel, or the pollution that's created when they travel by jet. So what they've done is they've got the money to buy the right to pollute. They're not talking about laws and putting the EPA into place and saying, look, let's take polluters and let's fine them for polluting and take the money and put it into alternative energy sources. They're saying, well, we can just buy these so-called credits and then we can keep on polluting. And that's what the bill is about. It's about a market scheme. And we're going to be taken to the cleaners again, you and I.
I believe that 100%. What's the connection to Al Gore and this carbon credit system?
Al Gore is one of the owners of a corporation that is going to be buying and selling these pollution credits. And one of the things he did when he built his house is, instead of making it a perfect environmental model of a house that someone would want because it's producing its own energy, it's got solar panels in it, all these things to make it really efficient and not use electricity, he put an electricity-guzzling house, essentially, built one, and then said that he was justified in doing that because from his own corporation he could buy the offsets in order to offset his pollution, or the credits to offset his pollution. And it was only when the public objected that he put a few solar panels on his house. But so the reason that he's so interested in this cap and trade legislation is not to reduce pollution, but because his investments and his corporate backers will make reap huge financial profits.
And remember, people said this could not be passed, but yet it was passed through the House 219 to 212.
Yes.
Do you expect it's going to be passed through the Senate, and if so, by what margin?
It's going to be a slim margin. I think it will pass, but we're going to work really hard in the next 2 or 3 months because they're working on the bill now in committee, and it's in committee. And there's 4 versions of the bill, so it's hard to know which one of the 4 versions they're working on.
Mm-hmm.
But so that's confusing to the public, and it's about 1,300 pages long. And it's stunning in lowering the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act to allow more pollution. I mean, the bill is just stunning in its scope and breadth.
Well, you said 1,300 pages. Let's talk about that for a minute. They added 300 of those pages at 3 a.m., and nobody on the House floor was even able to read that.
That's correct, because they hadn't even been collated. So what happened is when our elected officials in the House voted on the bill, not only hadn't the public seen it because it wasn't collated, but they hadn't read it, and many of the provisions were added, in the midnight hour.
I mean, how does that really speak to where our government's gone at this point, where they can add 300 pages to a 1,300-page bill at 3 in the morning, not even have a hard copy for the congressional party to read? Nobody in Congress can even read this thing, and then they're expected to vote for it.
That's correct. And what it speaks to me is it speaks of lobbyists and backdoor deals and business as usual in the congressional setting, because, see, if they actually let the public read it, the public might have a chance to object, and they didn't want to give the bill any time to be read by the public. So
how do you feel about the media just pushing this through, too? Because, again, the media isn't they're acting like the evil Republicans tried to stonewall this bill, not that, 300 pages weren't even able to be read.
Oh, the thing is that the media is all for the climate change bill, and it's all supposed to be all wonderful, and they haven't examined cap and trade. But what I noticed was that Senator Dorgan came out on the floor of the Senate and did a wonderful presentation explaining why he couldn't vote for the 400 pages of the cap and trade provisions of the legislation. And other groups are coming back and going to fight back to preserve the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act and not lower it so these corporate polluters can pollute more. So, and then the coal industry was handed, in that 300 pages, was handed big lobbying bonuses as well to keep on polluting in their areas. So I think that the bill should be scrapped. And so that's why when Meredith Smith and I went to, in June, when we went to the U.S. Senate in Washington, D.C., and the U.S. House, and we lobbied all of our senators and 2/3 of the House members, which was all we could do in about a week and a half, being there, going office to office, when we lobbied them to talk about these issues. And I think that more people have to really speak up, call Washington and say, hey, this bill needs to be scrapped, and we don't need to go down the road of paying off Wall Street one more time with another monetary giveaway.
And I believe you handed me a document pertaining to that bill that would create a bunch of different nuclear power plants throughout the country?
Yes, the the NRC, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, now, and the Department of Energy under Mr. Chu, who's now Energy Secretary, they're all pushing to get nuclear power back online again and put in new plants. Fission plants, proposed fusion plants, all kinds of plants. And they want to make nuclear power the new entity, and they want to, within the bill, it's going to fund at our expense putting in these types of power plants. And so what happens here is that they don't take into consideration that they're going to use a lot of water, steam, coming off the plants, water vapor is a greenhouse gas. Uranium mining is highly toxic, and they're going to be either doing it here, polluting our rivers and streams, or they're going to do it in countries where there's a lot of uranium. So you're going to have a lot of people in other countries working in these mines and suffering the consequences of uranium mining, which is not good for miners.
Now, how many plants are we talking about here? Because, again, I thought it was scattered throughout the United States. We're not talking about 1 or 2 or even 5 or 10, are we?
No, we're talking about a minimum of 28 that I've seen so far. And most of them are going to be located in areas which I think are highly dangerous, and that's areas where there's hurricanes, severe weather events, and in different areas where when they store the radioactive waste on site, it could escape during a hurricane and during different types of events.